All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar discussion today, Advanced B2B Marketing Analytic Hacks. We know you probably have so many things that you could be doing with your time, so we really do appreciate you spending it with us here. My name is Katie, and I'm going to be moderating today's event. Before I jump into some housekeeping items, I did want to let you know that this is going to be a pretty advanced analytical discussion and topic. So if that doesn't sound like something that you're interested in, or if you're more of a beginner, you might want to hop off now, but just wanted to give you a disclaimer. We are excited to have Ryan here. It's going to be a really great conversation. All right, so just diving into a few housekeeping items. So first of all, this webinar will be recorded and you'll get an email with that recording afterwards. So look out for that in your email. And all attendees are muted, but if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll also be monitoring the chat, so you can put them in either. All right, so I'd like to get started and introduce our speaker today, TripActions SVP of Growth and Systems, Ryan Schwartz. He is a recognized thought leader in growth and technical marketing, having managed advanced marketing and sales technology stacks for over 15 years. And prior to TripActions, Ryan has held leadership roles at MongoDB, DocuSign, and has been part of 5 successful exits since 2011 as an operator and advisor, including 2 IPOs and 3 mergers and acquisitions. We are very lucky to have Ryan here today. So remember, you can ask all the questions that you want in the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those at the end of the session. And with that, I'm going to let Ryan take it away. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here. Really excited to talk about some just analytical hacks, things I've learned over the years. Before we dive in, a quick introduction to TripActions. So TripActions is the only all-in-one corporate card expense management and travel solution. We've always had the best solution for corporate travel. It's an amazing technology, an amazing service. But in addition to that, we also now offer the absolute best in expense management and corporate cards as well, especially because of how well they work together. I think to illustrate this, let me just share an example. I live in Wisconsin. I travel a lot. When I go to book my trip, TripActions automatically knows my travel routines, where I like to stay, the flights I like to take. It bubbles those to the top. In a few clicks, I book my trip. Usually takes about 5 minutes. And then when I'm on my trip, I don't have to worry about receipts. I don't take pictures of receipts. I don't have to worry about sending expense reports. It's all automated with TripActions Liquid. It's a pretty amazing experience. So I'll just say, if you're still struggling with being frustrated booking trips for your corporate travel, or you're still worrying about submitting expense reports or taking pictures of your receipts, I really recommend checking out TripActions. It's a pretty awesome tech. All right, with that, let's dive in. So I'm basically going to cover kind of 3 major areas today. And first is like building a really solid architecture for your funnel. Everything starts with the funnel. If you can't track and have a really strong foundation for measuring your funnel, you're not going to get very far. So let's start there, and then diving into some insights and tips of how we can make that just like a really awesome architecture, and going beyond just the basics. And then what's beyond that? So now you have all of this architecture. How can you continue to just improve your analytical marketing? So let's dive right in. First, I want to share a mantra that I have, and that is, you cannot lead a market you are chasing. You have to be the first. You have to be the first to release messaging, the first to anticipate where the market is going. You have to be the first to release the product features that the market is going to need. And you cannot effectively do this if you don't have a good understanding of the data. Data is what makes you agile. Data is what tells you when something is resonating, when something isn't, when a shift might be happening. You have to have really good insights to the data if you want to be the leader, and you cannot lead a market you are chasing. So with that, let's start by going over how to build a funnel. What is the basics? What's the foundation that you need? Then let's talk about how to make that funnel awesome. And I'll share some tips to that. And then even beyond that, how do we continue to make it better? So let's start with the funnel. I think everybody in marketing has probably seen some type of view like this. And this is like the traditional funnel stages that most of us are probably aware of. You have these inquiries and MQLs and sales qualified opportunities, and maybe you're tracking discovery meetings. And we could argue whether or not this is the best way to illustrate a funnel, but this is at least a common way of doing it. I actually think probably the more proper illustration is something that looks like this. It's a journey across the buyer stages. It can be kind of messy in terms of how each prospect goes through this. But for the purpose of illustration, I think we can all align that we've seen something like this. However, the way that a lot of companies implement this funnel looks more like this, where you have leads that track inquiries and you have like a status field that you kind of change it to see if it's an MQL or an SAL. At some point in there, you're doing a contact conversion. And maybe that's at the same time as you're creating an opportunity. Maybe you're creating an opportunity before or after the meeting's been scheduled. But it's measuring and trying to understand the funnel through all of these different objects. And it's really complicated to do. And the other thing with activities, if you are tracking that, if you are tracking meetings, activities are just really hard to work with. So some challenges with this approach is that if you're using Salesforce and trying to understand how the funnel is performing in Salesforce and that type of implementation, it's really difficult to understand it in a single view. You have to use different report types for each stage, which means you usually end up taking the data out of the system. You put it into a BI solution of some sort, a Tableau or Looker or some solution that can kind of aggregate that data, which means now you're separating it from the core underlying system. Attribution tends to be simplified to just like first touch or last touch, which then you lose a lot of context. This concept of source just becomes conjecture because you don't have like a really solid definition of where source is and a really strong architecture that makes it ironclad. With that kind of traditional implementation, you don't have an ability to handle multiple trips to the funnel, or if you do, then trips get overridden. And even if they don't, you don't have the ability to get to like the point in time reporting of what the funnel looked like at any given point in time. If you're just using leads, you are limited to the information and context you can use to make routing decisions. You can't really track what changes from an ownership perspective at each stage. There's a lot of challenges with that traditional approach. So this is where I will give a shameless plug to Full Circle. I actually think Full Circle is the bedrock of measuring our funnel. And it does so because it's very creative in using the campaign member object as that foundation for measuring the funnel. So campaign members is the one object that's tied to all of the primary objects. So if you want to measure the entire funnel, you can do it from a single object. Inquiries, MQLs, SALs, scrolls, all of that is done through the same object. And then the other thing I'd recommend here is that if you are tracking discovery meetings, I would recommend not using activities for that. Do it through a custom object that you can relate back to the member through Flow. We'll talk a lot more about Flow here in a little bit, but it just makes it a lot easier to manage and report on. So if you use Full Circle as your bedrock, as your underlying foundation, that is a great place to start. It's a really excellent solution. But I have some tips for making it awesome. So the first tip is set lookups via Flow. So this is important for a few main reasons. So by default, campaign members, but also Full Circle will set some of these lookups for you. So you'll have lookups for leads and contacts and opportunity. You'll have a few lookups for the owner based off a certain stage progression. But a couple more that I'd recommend adding is one is a direct lookup to the account. And you might say, well, I don't need that. I can get to the account by going campaign member to contact to account. And that is true. But then you're limited to get into the owner fields of that account. And for us, that's really important. We really need those owner fields because that gives us what segment the AE was assigned to, what region, the title of the AE, the role, et cetera. So and you're limited to the third degree of relationships. So if you put that lookup directly on the campaign member, you can now get to all of those owner fields as well. And we do the same thing for our discovery meetings. So discovery meetings are what we use as one of our primary KPIs for the SDR team and for marketing. How many meetings do we set? That's a custom object. We stamp that custom object directly to the campaign member. so that we can get to all of the information related to that discovery meeting. And that discovery meeting has the opportunity, the account, the contact, and the campaign member. And so you can think about all the information that gives you and all the context it has. And if there's any other relevant objects in your org, I just recommend, instead of getting to those through relationships, just stamp the direct relationship to the campaign member. And why? Why is this important? Yes, we have this issue of the third degree, so making sure that you can get to all of the relevant information. But the benefit of that is it allows you to create one single report type to do all of your reporting. This is so important and such a valuable feature of Full Circle and just a really clean reporting architecture. So if you create a custom report type that is for campaigns and campaign members, you can then use those lookup fields. So you bring in all of the related fields that from their lead, contact, account, opportunity, discovery meeting that are relevant to you. But you can also normalize fields. So if there's a value that you want to normalize from the lead in contact or from the lead in account, such as maybe employee size, if you have a lead, you need to know the employee size, or if it's a contact related to the account, you can get the employee size from the account. Instead of having to pull two different fields to that, you can just normalize that with the formula field on the campaign member. So this allows you to basically get to all of those lookup relationships directly to the report type and all of the formulas for normalization, which means you can basically report on the entire funnel through just a single report type, which is incredibly useful. An example of the output of this is in the bottom right. From a single report type, I can see the MQL tier. So we have 3 tiers of MQLs. Tier 1 is our highest intent. And then show the volume of funnel stage progression that happened within a monthly cohort, and then the conversion rates of that funnel progression in that monthly cohort. You cannot do this in a traditional funnel architecture. It isn't a way to do it in Salesforce. You would have to take all of this data out, put it into a BI solution to do anything even close to this. And that's just one example. There's an endless number of examples as to why this is incredibly useful. And the other recommendation, tip number 3 that I'd recommend is use Flow to optimize performance. So what are some examples of this? Now, first I'll say Flow is what I like to use just because Flow's come a long ways over the past few years. There's really like so much you can do with it now. If you are a company that has developers in-house that you prefer to do everything in Apex, by all means, you can certainly do that. Apex is very efficient as well. But for those who don't have Apex developers in-house, Flow is a great alternative. It's come a long ways over the last couple of years. But some ways you can use Flow to optimize performance. One is you can measure SLAs. Now, we're going to speak more on SLAs in a little bit, but Flow is a great way to implement it. You can do snapshotting like with more complex logic. So Full Circle on its own has the ability to do sync fields, but in many cases, you want to add more complexity to the logic. So for example, if you have different business units or different segments, or you want to maybe snapshot at certain points in time, Flow allows you to create all of that logic and do that snapshotting. And just snapshotting is basically just taking a value from a related object and snapshotting that onto the campaign member so that if later that value changes, it doesn't matter. The point of the snapshot is I want to know what it was at this point in time. And so that's a great use for Flow. It's also useful for moving values from the campaign member back and forth to the lead in contact. Now, you'll want to be cautious with this. You don't want to be seeking a ton of values all the time. But in some cases, this is incredibly useful and important to do. For example, if you're using Outreach or SalesLoft or something like that, and you want to allow for bulk importing into sequences, the best way to do that in Salesforce is using views. So if you want to take some of the information from the campaign member, like the MQL and campaign type or tier, you can stamp that onto the leading contact, and that way you can show it in the view that we can bulk import them into sequences, or even better yet, automate their entry into sequences. So Flow is a great way of managing that. Just be cautious with how many edits and syncs that you do. It can incur some CPU usage or roll lock if you're not cautious. And then another amazing feature of Flow is being able to convert logic to asynchronous. So for us, we have quite a bit of dependencies. When you make adjustments to contacts or accounts, it can update other related records. And that can cause CPU and role lock if you're not cautious, especially if you're doing bulk campaign associations in our environment. So for us, we just use a flow step that says if it's bulk, it will automatically convert it to async, which avoids all of the CPU and role lock issues. So if you're not using flow, you're still kind of using PBs or process builders or workflows, I really suggest migrate all that to flow. It gives you so much more flexibility and solves a lot of those complexities. And if you do this, if you have a really solid foundation with a full circle technology, you implement some of these tips for making it awesome, the benefits are really awesome. Like you can report an entire funnel to one report type. It's incredibly useful. You don't have to worry about getting to all this data using different report types. You can track the attribution and the source of each funnel trip. We're going to talk about that a bit more in a bit. With that, you get the source becomes intuitive and clear. You remove the ambiguity. You have a very clean definition of what source is. We'll talk about that in a bit as well. And then you'll natively support multiple trips through the funnel, and you'll achieve point-in-time reporting. This is really useful if you go back. You never want to go back to prior months and see that the data changed from when you first reported it. That's a really easy way to lose confidence and to lose benchmarks and understand historical performance. So achieving point-in-time reporting with this architecture is really important, especially for forecasting. It allows you to use more context in your routing decisions. Because you have a lead contact approach, you can use all that information from the campaign member to make smarter routing decisions. You can stamp multiple ownership changes throughout the funnel journey. You can use Flow to optimize and to use it for discovery meetings. And you can do all of this on top of force.com, which is also really useful. There's no magic happening in some other system and coming back and writing data. You know exactly what it's doing. You've designed it all. It's all on force.com. And it just makes the data like super understandable and predictable. Okay. So how do we make it better? So we have a strong foundation. We've made it pretty awesome. How do we make it better? My first recommendation here is to bifurcate attribution and source. I think there's this common belief that attribution and source needs to be singular. I disagree. I actually think it shouldn't be. It should be separate. So then it becomes then how do you define attribution and source? What do I mean by that? And to preface this, I want to say this is where I think it's really important within an organization to make sure that your vocabulary and your vernacular match. Many times people might be saying the same words, but their understanding of those words are different. So one might say attribution, one might say source, and if the common understanding is that those things are exactly the same, then that's a problem. I would recommend creating a dictionary of some sort, just making sure that everybody is aligned with the words that we use and the meaning of those words. So to go into what I mean by this, the difference between attribution and source, let's start with the dilemma, the classic kind of definition dilemma. So let's say that marketing sourced the first contact of this account 2 years ago. And since then, it's been nurturing that account, nurturing the contacts, it's found more contacts, and the source actually the majority of contacts on that account, and has continued to drive engagement. On the other side, sales has also been reaching out to contacts in this account. It's identified contacts, it's imported those as part of their own prospecting efforts, it's engaged with those contacts. During conversations, they've identified key stakeholders and really progressed the conversation along. So who sourced the opportunity? I mean, I think legitimately both have an argument here as to then sourcing it. This is where it can become conjecture if you don't have an ironclad definition about what source is. But it's also because you're trying to fit too much into one definition. So this is where we can have funnel source and team attribution. Let's talk about funnel source first. So funnel source is the methodology of tracking what caused the active trip through the funnel all the way through to opportunity and revenue. And if you achieve this, you basically erase the ambiguity, you erase the debate, because you've aligned on the methodology and you have the right technology that can truly track toward that methodology. So the underlying requirement here is that you are able to track each trip through the funnel. Full Circle does enable this, but if you are not able to track each trip through the funnel, if you don't know when a funnel is open or when a funnel is closed, you will not be able to achieve this definition. What does this look like in practice? So let's say you have a campaign, and that campaign is a piece of online collateral, which resulted in a brand new lead to the system, but did not yet meet the MQL threshold, so therefore did not MQL. But marketing starts to work it, starts to drive additional engagement, and therefore it does. It was actually able to generate another campaign association by this contact. Let's call this one a webinar. And this time it did meet the MQL threshold. If that's the case, then the entire progression of the funnel will be tracked back to that campaign B. Even if this happened the very next day, campaign A is what might have sourced the name, but campaign B is what sourced the active trip to the funnel. So when it gets down to opportunity, campaign B becomes the funnel source. Let's talk about another example. Let's say that campaign B did not yet meet the MQL threshold. And instead, we have a really good AE here. And this AE is monitoring their accounts. He's monitoring the activity of the contacts on those accounts and notices engagement by one of the contacts on one of his accounts. And even though it didn't MQL, this rep says, this is a good contact. They're showing engagement. It's on one of my accounts. I'm going to reach out. This is where having some nuance and the ability to make some scenarios captured in the funnel source definition really becomes useful. So the way that we've implemented it is that if a rep reaches out through outreach, so it's a sequence to start calling a contact, and that contact had engaged in a campaign within 45 days, it'll reactivate the funnel on that prior campaign response. If that prior campaign response was more than 45 days ago, it'll open as outbound, as sales sourced. But if it was within 45 days, it'll actually reactivate that prior response. That's a native Full Circle feature, really, really useful. It helps handle some of these more nuanced situations. So, and then if you have any additional campaign touches that come in, it just counts as influence toward those opportunities. So as a result of this, we can handle funnel source clearly defined for if it's coming in MQLing from inbound. We can handle a scenario where if it's outbound with no prior campaign responses or campaign responses older than 45 days, it gets opened up as outbound. Or if there is a campaign response did not meet MQL threshold, but the rep started to work it within 45 days, it goes back and provides the funnel source to the prior campaign response. So it's just a way of clearly defining funnel source and creating technology that handles the different nuances. So this is great. This is funnel source. What are we missing? And we're missing the part about team attribution. So team attribution is the methodology of tracking what role and team created the opportunity, regardless if it was marketing or sales sourced. And the benefit of this is that the sales team is incentivized to use all tactics available to them. Let me share an example of how this comes into play. So let's say you're an organization that really values sales outbound prospecting. And actually, part of their quota requirement is that they outbound a certain number of their deals each quarter. So if you're only using the funnel source definition and only outbound counts toward their quota, then essentially you've disincentivized the sales team to use marketing campaigns and the marketing tools that we provide to the sales organization to help them with their prospecting. If they use those tools, they're at risk of that coming as being marked as inbound instead of outbound, and therefore wouldn't count toward their quota. So even though we have all these great tools available to them, they might say, I can't use the online collateral, I can't use webinars, I can't use direct mail, I can't use it because it'll count toward inbound instead of outbound. That's a real problem. And we as a marketing and sales organization, as a demand team together, we should be using all of the tactics available to us to be successful. So by clearly separating team attribution, we can enable the sales team to say, hey, you are the team that the opportunity is going to be attributed to, regardless of the tools that you use to get there. And so that, therefore, the sales team is incentivized to use the tactics available to them. So what does this look like? This basically means that from a funnel source perspective, you essentially have inbound and outbound sales or marketing. But from a team attribution perspective, you have the different teams that are creating opportunities, and that's AEs or SDRs, or maybe you have some more in your organization as well. But the point is that you have inbound, outbound tracked, and you have team attribution tracked. And if you're a company that takes the outbound really seriously, which is great, you should, you can use team attribution as a way of fulfilling that quota attainment for that outbound need, while still enabling them to use the inbound tools available to them. Okay, next, contextual SLAs. I'm going to share a pet peeve of mine. One of my pet peeves is this concept of 5-minute SLAs. I think if you're a company or somebody who claims to have achieved a 5-minute SLA, you're most likely just measuring a very small portion of that speed to lead. If you're really measuring an entire speed to lead and you're achieving 5-minute SLAs, that's incredibly impressive. I'd love to learn how you did it. In my experience, there's some complexities to achieving that, and that's part of that's the definition. So let's dive into it. So what are you measuring when you say SLA? Are you measuring the time from the response occurring to the rep taking action? Are you measuring the time it takes to sync to Salesforce to the rep taking action? Are you measuring the time it takes for the response to be assigned to the rep and the rep taking action? And most likely, if you're saying you've achieved a 5-minute SLA, it's the third one here, where you're basically just measuring how long it takes from the point it was assigned to the point the rep taking action. And the problem with that is that you're missing all of the context and opportunity to optimize and truly measure speed to lead. So we need more context to know how to optimize speed to lead. Speed to lead, I think we all can agree, is incredibly important when it comes to, especially those tier ones, those high intent inquiries that are coming in. Speed to lead matters. So if you don't have all the context, you don't know what to optimize. So my recommendation is basically to optimize and measure 4 different speed to leads. One is the amount of time it takes for your marketing automation platform to sync that response to Salesforce. So let's say you have a form submission or any other campaign response. How long does it take for that response to occur? We have Marketo. How long does it take for Marketo to sync to Salesforce? The second is how long then does it take from the point in which it's synced to Salesforce to then have routed? We use lean data for routing. How long does it take for lean data to route it from the point it's synced to Salesforce to the rep? And then from the point it was routed by lean data, how long does it take it from the rep to have been assigned to the rep taking action? And then at the end, in total, how long does it take from the beginning, the time of the response, to the time the rep took action? And you can see this kind of a screenshot of what this looks like down below. And this is all stamped onto the campaign member using Flow. So you can see that basically it took 3 minutes for Marketo to process the response and sync it to Salesforce. It took 6 minutes for Salesforce to process that response, that sync, and route it through lean data. That took 6 minutes. And then from the time lean data assigned it to the rep, it took 17 minutes for the rep to take action. And then altogether, it took 26 minutes. So this gives us a ton of context to understand exactly what our speed to lead is. Okay, so forecasting and attainment. This is something that I find just so important to understanding what campaigns to execute, what should the outcome of those campaigns be, how are we performing as a team, and it's absolutely dependent on a really strong foundation of analytical marketing. So before I show you the results, I want to share with you the methodology that we use and what you can use if you haven't built this yet. So first, I'll just say we do this all in Google Sheets, and you might question why Google Sheets. So I like to use the best tool for the job. So we do a lot of our reporting in Salesforce directly with with a single campaign report type. We use Google Sheets for a lot of things where we can just get our hands dirty, build the models, see the underlying data. And we do definitely also still use BI solutions at times as well. Tableau is our primary one that we use. So for certain types of reporting, it depends what it is, we use the right tools for the job. And for this, I personally like to use Google Sheets. So how does it work? We start by creating a master sheet in the doc for their SQO targets and the pipe related to those SQO targets. That is our anchor. Everything else on the sheet is for targets is based off of that anchor of SQOs. We then use our 3-month average conversion rates by stage and campaign type to know how many increased MQLs, SALs, SQLs, and close won deals we should expect as a result of our 3-month average conversion rates using that SQO target as our anchor. As a result of that, we now know what our target should be each month based off that SQO target, what our increased MQL target should be. And then we measure attainment. So we use a plugin called G-Connector for Salesforce. There's a lot of tools you can use for this. This is just the one that we use, but basically it takes data from Salesforce, a report, you build a report in Salesforce, you select a report in G-Connector, and it syncs it to the Google Sheet. And we have a Google Sheet for each main funnel stage out of Salesforce. And that's automated. It updates every 3 hours in how we built it. And then we process that data from those underlying sheets into a weekly and a monthly aggregated view. And then we break that out by segment, region, and campaign type. So with that, we can measure exactly how we are performing against the targets that we've defined, and then also against the forecast that the sheet generates. So from a forecasting perspective, essentially what we do is, this is the part that gets a little soft. So just sharing that. Each month we run different programs. We test new program types, we test new third parties. So we ask our program managers to put in all of the programs they're executing in a given month into the sheet, and then what they estimate the number of inquiries that program to generate. We don't ask for MQLs, we don't ask for SQOs, we let the sheet handle all of that, but we ask for what should be the easiest thing to estimate based off our benchmarks and historicals. And that is the number of inquiries we expect that campaign to produce. On top of that, we take our evergreen programs and we use the 3-month averages for this evergreen programs. And then we take the 3-month averages by stage and campaign type of those programs to help produce our forecast. So based off of all of this, you'll get something like this. So this data has all been randomized. It's just for the purpose of illustration, but this is truly what you get, and this is what we have built. So you have, let's say for MQLs, you'll get a target based off of that SQO target, and then the conversion rates to figure out what the target needs to be. We'll get our forecast using the same thing, the programs we're producing and the evergreen programs and their 3-month average conversion rates to get to the forecast. And we have our actuals, which is the attainment data coming from Salesforce. And with that, we can see how are we performing to target and what is our month gap to where we should be in a given month. And then another view of this, I think is important, is to see a weekly view. So how are we performing in week 3 compared to prior week 3s to understand how we are trending ahead? One important tip for weeks is the weeks 1 through 3 should always be the same regardless of the month. It doesn't matter when the first of the month is. The first week is always the 1st through the 7th. And therefore, week 4 is always the 21st through the rest of the month. So naturally, week 4 is always a bit longer. Week 1 through 3 is always identical every month. And then for each of these charts that you produce, you can chart. So you create a dashboard tab that has a chart of basically all of the tables you produce. And that chart can show you what your target was, your forecast, and then your actual attainment. And just to put this a concept of scale here, this isn't the full thing. This is a copy, a bit of a snippet of it. But you can really build this out. If you think about all of the different ways and lenses of the data that you want to see, by all the different segments, by weeks, by regions, there's so many different cuts of the data you could want to see. You can build all those out as tables into an underlying sheet And then each of those tables also gets a chart. So therefore, you always have the visuals for the chart. You always have the underlying data to understand exactly what's happening. And you can get a really, really good pulse as to how your forecast and attainment is looking. My other quick thing that's great about doing it this way is whenever you're creating decks, you already have the table, you already have the chart. You can just copy and paste the table and chart into the deck and you're done. It's a really good way of putting decks together as well. So one other quick tip on analytics, and that is that marketing and SDRs should have the exact same KPIs. If the SDR team is held responsible for generating meetings held, that's the primary metric, then that's what marketing's primary metric needs to be. If it's sales qualified opportunities, then that's what marketing needs to be. If you don't do it that way and you say, okay, marketing, you're only responsible for driving MQL, sales, you got it from here, you're going to naturally have misalignment. You can't have a scenario where one team says we're doing really well and the other team says nothing's working. They have to use the exact same definitions, the same exact KPIs. That's how you really ensure alignment from a data perspective. So if it's not clear, analytical marketing is so close and dependent on technical marketing. You cannot be an analytical marketing without having strong technical people within marketing and strong tech. So I think there's kind of three main pillars of technical marketing. And it's all with this kind of general philosophy of you have to hire the best people and use the best tech. But the pillars are, the first is hire technical operators. Marketing operations is so much more than just campaign ops. You need to have somebody in the team who is truly capable of deep technical integrations, Salesforce expertise, system architecture. You need to hire true experts. And you might say, actually, I don't need that. I have a business systems team that has that. I have a really good sales ops team, and that's great. We do too. But you need these people in marketing. And for one major reason, and that is because you want these technical people held accountable for driving growth, which means you want their priorities to be set by a growth team. How can you have these technical people and these resources focus on growth if they're not part of the growth organization? They're going to have other priorities. So you want these technical operators in marketing, in the growth team, so that they're helping to come up with a strategy to drive growth. The second is hiring data analysts. And I mean like actual data analysts, those that know SQL and data visualization and modeling. You cannot improve what you cannot measure. And you might say, didn't you just get done showing like all the reasons why you don't need to put this into SQL? No. I think what I've shown you is a way of building a really strong foundation of data that you can have benchmarks on. You have a really clean architecture. And you can do a lot of reporting without necessarily needing SQL. But if you get into like deep modeling, or if you're trying to do a correlation between marketing activity and in product usage, SQL quickly becomes part of the play. And so if you hire these true data analysts, the speed in which you can identify insights from the data is just that much more quick. It's that much more powerful. And you need this so that you can lead the market, so that you can be agile. And the last tip, last pillar is technology and process. You absolutely have to have a really strong foundation before you start building on it. But you also need to challenge yourself to continue to think expansively. Don't fear change management. One of my real beliefs when it comes to the way that we partner with our technology providers is that you have to earn every renewal. I will use the best tech. If we're giving product feedback, or I'm seeing another competitor out innovate, then I can't be afraid of change management. We will use the best tech. So that is like, you have to continue to think expansively in that way. Every renewal has to be earned. And you, as the consumer of that technology, also owe back to your technology providers to be technology partners, to give that feedback, to be transparent about what you need, how you're trying to innovate and evolve, and help them. Be clear with them so they can help you do that. Constantly evolve. And I want to give one other quick thought here. I think the longer you're at a company or the more sophisticated that company becomes, it's very, very easy to fall into this trap of reductive thinking versus expansive thinking. Let me give you a real example. So let's say that everything I just showed you've already built something like this, or you've already built something far beyond this. And then every time you get something new, it's like, well, we can't do that because it'll impact X, Y, and Z, or we can't do that because it could impact this team, or no, replacing that technology would be hugely disruptive. We can't prioritize that. And it quickly becomes this thing where you're stuck in this reductive thinking. And as soon as you've done that, you've killed agility, you've killed innovation, you've killed your ability to be expansive. So my challenge to you, this is hard. I know this is hard because the more sophisticated the solution, the more complex it becomes. And therefore, it's a lot more difficult to make changes and fall into that reductive thinking. But I challenge you to continue to evolve, to think expansively. If something comes with you, it's a challenge. It's like, how can we make this work? If you see a new technology that's really immersive, that could make a big impact, how can we make this work? How could we adapt this technology? What of our technologies do we have that's holding us back? Continue to think expansively. So I hope this was helpful. I wanted to show basically an underlying funnel architecture that you could really build upon, give you some insights and tips on how to continue to make it better and make it awesome. And then kind of some thoughts beyond just the funnel about how to really become a successful analytical marketer. So I appreciate your time. And then I wanted to also just share this quick, let's go. This is our kind of motto at TripActions. I think it's inspirational, keeps us motivated, and helps us lead. So let's go.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. That was great. Claps. All right. So we do have questions, but if any of you on the call have questions for Ryan, feel free to put them in the chat box or this Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. So the first question was asked kind of towards the beginning of your presentation, just so you have some context. What if I want to see how much opportunity pipeline I've generated from contacts that started as a prospect in a specific campaign, but didn't convert or qualify in that campaign?
Yeah, so this is where influence becomes really important. So I have kind of a general belief on influence. I think a lot of technologies have tried to solve this in different ways, especially in Salesforce, and they use these complex models of weighted attribution or bell curves and things like that. I personally I'm not a big fan of any of those. I actually think the best way to measure influence, and this is where Tableau comes into play. So the best way to measure influence, in my opinion, is you take the total opportunities that a campaign has touched through the account. You can do it through contact too, but I personally like to do it through the account. So campaign, all the opportunities through the account that is touched, and you take that total value one time. So if let's say that you have 6 contacts in that account that touched the campaign, and all 6 contacts are related to the opportunity, you get that opportunity one time, full value. And then when you look at that, it's the most intuitive way to look at it. This campaign has touched this many opportunities, unique opportunities, this much unique revenue in pipe. And then you use that to benchmark. So it's kind of interesting in isolation. It's way more interesting when you use it for benchmarking and to basically put it into a stack order. So then at the end of a quarter, like, what are all of the campaigns that executed? What was their total influence? And which ones influenced more or less in terms of number of opportunities and influence? So depending on the campaign that you're executing, that campaign really isn't meant to be the funnel source. It's meant to be a lead generator at the beginning. You just need to make sure that you align the right KPIs to the intent of the campaign. And if that's the case, you want to measure the number of inquiries, net new names, MQLs that it generated, and the amount of pipe that it influenced, not how many scrolls it sourced. That's not the purpose of that campaign. So that's what I'd recommend there.
Awesome. Okay. So this question was asked kind of towards the end of your presentation, but does the campaign data taxonomy include things like paid media or direct? Or are campaign types limited to only what the lead converted on, like the offer content?
I love this question. Okay, so a campaign type does not indicate its channel. Channels should be tracked separately. And the reason is because campaign types can be a webinar, it can be demo, it can be online collateral, and you might be pushing all of these different types of campaigns of content through paid channels. So if you just say all paid is a campaign type, then you're missing out on exactly what's working, what's not working. You might also be missing out which assets working, what's not working. So we basically track. We have used Full Circle DST. We also use some of our own kind of digital tracking that we built in-house. We merged those two together. But the end result is that we track the channel, campaign, UTM, basically all the UTMs directly onto the campaign member. And then we can say, okay, all the demo requests we've generated in a given month, how many of those came from paid, which campaigns did they come from, so we can continue to optimize. And then if you haven't done this yet, I'd recommend it. There's a way to automate the positive conversion events back to your paid search channels. And we use basically MQLs for that. So if we basically track the positive conversion events onto the campaign member, we put that through G-Connector into a Google Sheet that is then consumed by Google for paid search, and then we use that as a positive conversion event. So one tip for that is make sure you're tracking that G-CLID. That G-CLID is really important to get that correlation back. But paid should be channels on the member. It shouldn't be a campaign type.
And then you just answered this in your description, but someone else asked, does TripActions use Full Circle's digital source tracker? And you said DST, which is the abbreviated.
Yep, sorry, I'm big on abbreviations.
Yeah, we are too.
we do use DST. It helps us with basically everything I just talked about, and then on top of that, we put a little bit of our own tracking on it as well.
Okay, great. A few more questions. Is the funnel source the first touch? Is funnel source the tipping point campaign?
Yeah, so Full Circle refers to it as the tipping point campaign. I like to refer to it as funnel source for one primary reason. One, I think it's more intuitive, but two is that funnel source can also be outbound. And when you think of tipping point campaign, that has like this inherent, I think, correlation to marketing, but funnel source could be an outbound campaign as well. So so I've always just called it funnel source, but yes, it is essentially the tipping point campaign.
Our marketing team never creates opportunities. Does your team attribution apply in this case? Sales always creates opportunities at my company.
Yeah, so we don't create marketing at the companies I've been at, don't create opportunities as either. So the team marketing would get basically inbound credit from a funnel source definition, but marketing could never be the team attribution value. So what's nice about this is that your team attribution will be basically the sales team that actually created the opportunity, while we're still tracking whether or not that opportunity was inbound or outbound through funnel source. So it gives us both those lenses. But no, marketing does not create opportunities here. Team attribution would never be marketing. That'll always be the sales team. Funnel source is where you would get the inbound, the marketing.
Another question about if we are going to be sending out the recording, and yes, we will be sending out the recording of this, so be sure to check your email for that. We'll send it out tomorrow. And then here's another one. Okay. How do you work with demand gen to give them visibility to what's working and what's not working?
Yeah. So there's a few different tools that we give to our demand gen team. One is we have a few Salesforce dashboards and reports, but I think the best way to consume it is, and we have that master sheet that I showed you, that forecast and attainment sheet. So the tools that we provide, basically, it starts with basically a Google Doc. And in that Google Doc are definitions of different lenses that you might want to see. What are the top campaigns by inquiry, the conversion rates for those, the MQLs, or what are the close one rates? Like, depending on the different lens that you're looking for, we have basically a Google Doc that lists what is it you're looking for. Here's a link to the report, and you can go find it. So we do have like this kind of report dictionary that we've enabled the demand gen team to use, and that's basically like their source of truth. In addition to that is that master forecast sheet and attainment. That is essentially our Bible. That is what tells us exactly how we are performing against targets and forecasts. But for many reasons, you might want some dedicated Salesforce reports and different lenses there too. So essentially, we created a Google Doc that has like definitions of all those things with links.
Here's another one. What additional functionality and insight do you need to build in-house to augment DST?
Okay, so there's a couple of things here. So what DST does a good job of is that you kind of do session tracking. So you can say, like, did they if they originally came in through a paid search campaign and then they didn't convert, DST will go and create a anonymous campaign association for that record. So that information would have just been lost with the tools that we provided. We don't have the ability to know with what we had originally created. And just to be clear, we had built our solution before we purchased DST. So that has the ability to track basically those first touches, those non-conversion touch points. And when that conversion occurs, full circle DST comes back and writes that in. What we have built prior to that was basically just stamping whatever the UTMs were at the time of their form submission, their page, the UTM values, and the GCLID and the MSCLID. We stamp that into Marketo, which stamps it to the lead contact for a moment, which then uses Flow to update the campaign member, which then clears the value off of the lead in contact. So we have those values on the member, so we know exactly what it was at the time the form was submitted. And DST will try to correlate that as well. The challenge and the pros and the cons is that if you have, let's say you have 4 campaign responses pretty quickly, maybe 4 is a little aggressive, maybe 2. They went to a online collateral and which led to a demo and they watched a video. But the tracking we built, that would have tracked basically the UTMs to one of those members. And their tracking DST it could potentially track that to all of them, or it might only track it to a couple, depending on the timing and the correlation, the rules that you put in place when you implemented your DST. So essentially what we do is that if we have, we basically just say, if we have a direct value from what we've tracked, because we know like the point of submission, these are the UTMs, this is what it was when it gets to the member, use those. Otherwise, if DST has a value, use those. We've created formula fields that look at both of the UTM values that we track, those from DST, those from our own tracking, and then the formula gives us the final UTM parameters for each one.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, we have a comment here from Jordan that says, Ryan, you're a genius. Thank you for answering my questions. I'm going to go back and listen to the recording on 0.75 speed to understand more. Thanks for that comment.
I'm glad it was helpful.
Love it. One last question here. How do you know when you're ready to use Full Circle for forecasting? Yeah,
so this one is the most important thing to know from a forecasting perspective is that you have to have enough data in Full Circle, and you have to have had like enough time to where you haven't been changing it constantly to where like you can actually use historicals as some type of benchmark. If you're constantly changing, and then I'm not saying like you can't evolve it, we're constantly making little iterations, little adjustments. We need to have enough to where if you start to use historicals for the purpose of forward-looking forecasts, that needs to be accurate. So essentially what I would probably suggest is having 3 to 6 months of data before you start to try to use that data for forecasting. But once you've done that, like once you have that benchmark and that baseline, then you build the model kind of like the way I described it, it'll start to give you results. And then you can see like how big is what each month's actuals were to what our forecast was. And ours isn't always perfect. Our goal is to get it above 90%. Usually it's kind of around that 94 to 95% range in terms of what it's forecasting, but our goal is basically above 90%.
All right. It looks like that's all the questions that we have. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Ryan, for such an informative conversation. We'll be sending out this presentation to you all tomorrow morning, so look out for that in your email. And thanks again, Ryan.
Thanks all. Appreciate it.
Thanks.